Hey guys, it's Chris and I'm back with another Game of Thrones Season 7 video, and this time I wanted to talk about the cave scene with Jon and Dany and try to decipher what the hell's going on in there with all the sidewalk chalk. So as soon as Jon and Dany come into the cave where the paintings are, where Jon has already discovered them, the camera pans to the left slowly and we see a lot of these symbols here on the wall. And luckily enough for me, HBO sent me the official release of the images that they used in the storyboard, the writing of this episode. So I have the official HD images here, high definition, high quality, and these are to scale, by the way. And as you can see, this first symbol here seems to look... Okay, I know, I did draw these with an old-ass Photoshop or paint style program. Don't fucking judge me. I do this for the people. Anyway, this first little symbol here, when I first look at it, I think of the golden spiral. Now, the golden spiral is a geometric symbol that represents perfection because it has what's called a growth factor of pi, which is known as the golden ratio. And you commonly see this in nature when you look at things like conch shells, snail shells, etc. And a lot of times this is associated with divine symmetry. So being divine symmetry, we're talking about gods. We're talking about the old gods here specifically. So this is likely relating to the children and their own green seers, who I believe are the old gods. And of course, we're talking about people like Bloodraven and now Bran. And this next symbol here looks to be a sideways S, and if you spent any time in the 80s and possibly early 90s, you do know what the hell this is because every one of you scribbled it on your own damn notebooks. So maybe the children of the Forest just randomly scribbled down S symbols just like we do in the real world. And this next little symbol here that was repeated throughout the cave, the first thing I thought of when I saw this was a damn monkey's tail. It looks like an ass here with a little tail hanging off of it. I don't know, sideways, it could be something different. But I was thinking this related to a monkey's tail because we do see that in the preview we had before the season started, we saw Gilly reading a passage about the Long Night, about Azor Ahai specifically, and a part of it states this. In the Jade Compendium, Koloko Batar recounts a curious legend from Yi, which states that the sun hid its face from the earth for a lifetime, ashamed at something none could discover, and that disaster was averted only by the deeds of a woman with a monkey's tail. So I'm thinking here it could be related to that, or at least a shout out to that, to all the various cultures throughout the world. Various cultures had their own versions of the tail, and of course some of them dealt with that differently. We had Azor Ahai, of course, the last hero, and in this case a woman with a monkey's tail, but could also be referring to Tyrion. He is actually referred to as a twisted little monkey demon from time to time throughout the books, and if you think about it, Tyrion is now teamed up with Dany, so you have a woman with a monkey's tail in the sense that Dany now has Tyrion at her side, advising her, and maybe that points to her being the savior. And in our next shot, as the camera continues to pan, we see this other symbol here that looks to be like a one-eyed giant smiley emoji. No, but in all seriousness, this could represent a few things. It may be nothing at all. It certainly could be completely made up with no thought put to it whatsoever, but it kind of looks like in one sense a boat, perhaps maybe like a sailboat, but I doubt that. To me, it looks more like a mortar and pestle, which is what you call those medicinal grinding bowls that look like this. So this could indicate that the children of the Forest did know things about primitive medicine. And in fact, in the books, we do get something called Jojen paste that's described as looking bloody as well, and they feed that to Bran to help unlock his green seer abilities. So this may represent something like that, where they mix up these little pastes here to help their green seers, their gods so to speak, unlock their green seer abilities. And of course, next we have what we've seen before. This is the typical Children of the Forest spiral pattern, and we know this is based on where they did their rituals around a weirwood tree with stone-like pillars and this kind of arrangement here. For example, this is where they created the Night King. So this definitely represents the Children of the Forest, and we see this spiral pattern throughout all these symbols as well. And next we have a Theta symbol, and this is also repeated throughout this cave, and this is another math or geometrical call out here. Now this is something that George R. R. Martin used in his sci-fi book series as well, so it could be a simple shout out to that. In mathematics, it's actually a geometric variable, and also interestingly enough, in tarot reading, this symbol actually represents the moon, as in no sun, as in the long damn night. And of course, we've seen this before as well. In the very first scene of the very first episode, Winter is Coming in season 1, we did see all the bodies laid out of the wildlings that Will, Garrett, and Rhaemar Royce were riding after, being in the Night's Watch. So we have seen this before, and there is another variation we'll get to in just a few minutes. And next we have our standard bullseye here. This is just a circle with another circle inside of it. This is another pattern that repeats throughout the whole damn thing. And I think this could be a little bit more primitive version of some of the things we're about to see shortly, and that may represent the God's Eye. I think circles in some cases could represent actual weirwood trees, but this in particular you've seen before as well. If you think back to the end of season 1 when Dany hatched her dragons, this was the exact shape of the funeral pyre she had when she set up Drogo's body to burn. This was the shape you saw from the top view of the funeral pyre when she walked in and first hatched dragons with fire and blood. This next symbol I really have no idea, but to me it looks like some kind of pathway or some kind of directions, perhaps some kind of map. And when I look at it, I do think of some kind of river or fork in a river somewhere, so perhaps this is directions to some certain location. But then again, the dotted little lines here make it seem odd. It seems like that would be a solid line, when typically in their other patterns, the dotted lines seem to represent the stones that are placed like at the werewood trees where they do their rituals. So this could be a certain fork in a certain river perhaps even Blackwater Rush, which is near the God's Eye, and we did see that in this very episode. In our next symbol here, we seem to have two stacked on top of each other. The top one looks to be what we would call a standard equal sign, and the bottom one looks to be what's called a triple bar. Now a triple bar also essentially means equal, but it also just means identical, and it can also mean material equivalence, as in the children of the forest and the first men were fighting. They were fighting a war, and then they went to the God's Eye to shake on this pact. So this could represent them making peace, saying they're equal, and that they would split up a material equivalent of what they needed to live in Westeros in peace. This next symbol is really odd here. It looks to be another Theta type of symbol, but with double lines here, and some of them are actually closed off. If you look at it sideways, I guess you could say it kind of looks like a face, but I wouldn't say so. I think this is just another version of the Theta. And in our third shot here, we see this symbol here, another Theta version, but this time with double lines as well. This time the straight line seems to be going into the circle, so that could perhaps represent man themselves. And here is another spiral shaped symbol here, but this time it's a little bit different. We have solid lines on the outside and a circle on the inside. So I do think that this circle here represents a werewood tree, and the solid lines here just represented a little bit differently as far as the pattern they make with stones around werewood trees where they do their damn rituals. So I think this does represent the children of the forest in general, not necessarily a specific meaning. So any of these spiral patterns basically represent the children themselves, and those were the hints we got throughout the episodes when we saw the White Walkers leave these type of spiral symbols, that they were created by the children of the forest themselves. And in our next shot here, we have a very similar thing to the Theta, except the line doesn't go all the way through the center, and we have a little cross-like thing on the right-hand side. But if you look at this sideways, this almost is the exact symbol you saw in the very opening scene. So this kind of looks like what we would call a modern-day symbol for female. And if you think back again to the first episode in Season 1, there was a cross-like pattern at the bottom of the bodies that the White Walkers and Whites had left out of the wildlings they had killed. So it was a full Theta with this cross at the bottom. So I don't know if it has any relevance with females, but perhaps it could relate to something like the Night's Queen. Next shot here, we have another eye with an eyebrow to the right, it looks like. Or perhaps these things maybe represent the sun. These lines here on certain cave drawings could represent sun rays in some way, but in this case it doesn't wrap all the way around the circle. Then again, if you look at it sideways, it could also represent something on four legs, where you have four legs and then the head of some kind of creature. Now some of the children were of course green seers and wargs, so perhaps this is how they drew a direwolf back in the day with crayons. And this next symbol here reminds me of a path or a maze. This seems to be a slightly cruder version of the big painting we'll see in just a few minutes, because this one has no lines or circles within it, but this is the first time that a line actually wraps around on itself and makes like a path or a maze. So maybe this is a cruder way the children drew the God's Eye or Owl of Faces. And then we have this damn thing here. The first thing I thought of here was a flat-nosed Twitter bird logo. So I have no idea what this represents here. I mean, it could represent a bird, it could represent a dragon perhaps. Maybe if you look at it from the side, it could be like a helmet or something laying on its side. I have no fucking clue here. Hell, it could be a HUD on Tatooine. But next we come to the big one here. They really panned in on this shot here and left it there for a long time, and this was by far the biggest piece of artwork in this cave, and I think this is the one that actually represents the God's Eye at the Owl of Faces. You see here the maze style pattern that we just saw a few minutes ago, except this time it has circles in it, and of course the spiral pattern on the outside. So I think those circles here represent actual werewood trees, where you have the Owl of Faces, where all the trees were carved to witness the pact between first men and children. Then of course on the outside they do have their standard spiral patterns, where they typically place stones, where they do rituals and things of that nature. So it would make sense for this to be the maze at the center of the God's Eye on the Owl of Faces, where the inner circles represent actual werewood trees. So I think this is important here. This is showing where the pact began, and I think it may show where the whole damn thing will end. And then we go to the shot where we see the actual men and children of the forest drawn on the cave themselves. You can see the crude figures here. They're very tiny, and the men are a little bit larger. But right below that, you can see both the children of the forest spiral symbol, as well as another Theta type symbol. And I think both of these symbols represent children and men respectively as they come together, because we do see the symbols now right beside each other. And of course this is telling the story of how they came together, since we actually see the figures and the two symbols are side by side. And of course, last but not least, we go to the enemy himself. We see the Night King himself, and somebody brought a fucking blue crayon. You can see the blue of his eyes here, and as Jon tells Dany here, this is where the children and men came together to fight their common enemy, just like they need to right now at this very time. But if you notice here about the Night King painting here, he's not alone. At whatever point the children actually drew these cave paintings, he had already created some minions here, at least 3 lieutenants, so to speak, or as I call the whole group, the 4 horsemen. So this seems to indicate they do have a culture, and we know they have a language from the books. We know they make armor, etc. So this indicates that after he was created by the children of the forest, which was a big revelation, that he is going on to create some kind of culture based off of that, and he's been leaving this symbolism behind this whole entire time to tell us that he's coming after his maker, and he's coming after all of mankind as well, since they do leave those spiral patterns, which I think represent the children, and he does leave those Theta patterns as well to say he's coming after all of mankind too. Anyway guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. I didn't take this too seriously because I do think a lot of it is probably just made up symbols, but I do think it tells an overall story here about how the children and men were at war. You saw all the little symbols here at the very beginning of this, where it seemed to be a lot of stuff scattered all over the place. It seemed to be pretty chaotic, so that could represent the war between children and men themselves. And then as we go through different shots here, we see less and less symbols, and it seems to get a little more controlled. And then we see all these spiral references to the Isle of Faces, I believe, and I believe this is telling us a story that men and children came together to form the pact. So I think that represents them coming together, forming the pact of the Isle of Faces, as they face off the true enemy, the Night King, which they created themselves, who ended up being the enemy of everybody because they unleashed the nuclear option. As usual, thank you for all the support, especially to you guys on Patreon, and a huge shout out to my executive Patreon SmokeScreen producers, Griffin, Volguy10, Lala Gig, Kissa Powell, Marc Joseph, aka the Snow in Winterfell, Marylin Bentley, JoAnna, Sean Hayes, Anonymous, Doc Holiday, Goska, HoonJive, Kieran D20, Nicki Snow, Lo Horton, Erin Habig, Ashley May, Brian Solarz, Dean Bwell, Karla Stark, John Carey, Anastasia, Jason Landers, Rhiaanon, and DTizSmith. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the support. And thank you to everybody out there in YouTube land. And be sure to stop by the live stream again Sunday night at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, right after episode 5. We look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.